The dog in Run 17 had broken 3 kennel latches in 6 days and put 2 animal control officers on modified duty. Gordon Alessi, director of Duval County Animal Services on Huron Street, had worked animal welfare for 19 years. He'd managed the aftermath of fighting rings, pulled dogs from flooded crawl spaces, and once talked a hysterical man down from a Walmart parking lot holding a tranquilizer pistol. None of that had prepared him for what lived at the far end of the isolation ward. The intake form listed the animal as Stray 119. 82 pounds of Belgian Malinois, fawn and black coat, cross-hatched with old scars, including a ragged V-shaped notch torn from the top of the right ear that looked like it had been made by something far worse than a fence wire. He had arrived Thursday morning, when 2 Jacksonville sheriff's deputies cornered him in the Industryrand Avenue behind a freight brokerage near Talleyrand Avenue. It had taken a catch pole, a canvas drag lead, and the better part of 40 minutes to load him. One deputy needed 3 stitches above his left wrist. The other turned in her vest the following morning without explanation. Since that first afternoon, Stray 119 had not eaten a single meal. Not one bowl, even when pushed under the gate with a long-handled squeegee. Gordon stood outside the yellow safety line, marked on the concrete floor in front of Run 17, watching the dog pace. It moved the way no shelter dog he'd ever seen moved. Not frantic, not spinning in neurotic circles. It walked the full length of the run in a tight, precise pattern, paused at the rear corner, turned and came back. Every 3 circuits, it stopped at the chain-link door and stood absolutely still, scanning the hallway with eyes the color of dark honey, cataloging every person and sound before resuming its patrol. It didn't bark, it didn't whimper, it simply watched. Dr. Randall Fike, the shelter's contracted veterinary behaviorist, had spent 31 years working with displaced and traumatized dogs. He'd consulted for Miami-Dade following 2 hurricane displacement events. He was not a man who spooked easily. He lowered his clipboard and looked at Gordon. "This isn't fear aggression," Dr. Fike said, his voice level. "That dog isn't displaying a single displacement behavior. No lip-licking, no yawning, no whale eye. He's not stressed in the way we define stressed. He's operational." "Operational," Gordon repeated, like the word didn't quite fit his mouth. "He is functioning according to a protocol we didn't write." Dr. Fike adjusted his glasses. "Whatever that protocol is, it's deeply embedded. He's holding a perimeter, Gordon. He doesn't see a kennel. He sees a position he's been ordered to secure. That's a hell of a way to describe an 80-pound stray. Whatever he isn't a stray. Not in any sense of that word that matters." Gordon turned back to the dog. As if it knew it was being discussed, Stray 119 stopped mid-stride and locked eyes with him through the chain link. The stare wasn't aggressive. It was patient, evaluating. The stare of something waiting, not something trapped. "He fractured our reinforced aluminum catch pole yesterday," Gordon said quietly. "Not bent, fractured. Stevie needed an X-ray." "I know. I have 13 staff members who won't go past the yellow line. I don't blame them." He cleared a behavioral assessment for euthanasia this morning, Randall. Dr. Fike didn't argue. His jaw tightened slightly, the way it did when he was choosing between what he felt and what he knew to be professionally true. He needs a specialized veterinary setting, military-grade behavioral rehabilitation, and a handler with specific training to even begin assessment. We don't have any of those things. His chip reads blank on every civilian scanner we've tried. Gordon was quiet for a long moment. "We've had him 6 days. He's going to starve himself to death in there anyway if we wait much longer." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Schedule it for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Tuesday." Dr. Fike nodded slowly. He didn't look at the dog when he turned to leave. Inside Run 17, Stray 119 completed another circuit and stopped at the far corner. He lowered his head and pressed his nose against the gap below the chain-link door, pulling air in long, slow drafts. Everything smelled wrong here. The bleach, the fear suite of confined animals, the recycled air of a building that had never once carried the smell of open desert or aviation fuel, or the specific worn leather of the one set of hands that had ever given him a command he recognized as real. He didn't know what had happened to those hands. He knew only that they had not come. He had been trained to hold his position until relief arrived, and so he held it. As the hours became days, and the days stacked into something, he had no framework to measure. He was not designed for confusion, he was designed for mission, and so he converted this concrete run into the only mission available. Survive, maintain the perimeter, wait. He had survived worse, he would wait. 19 miles northeast, in a second-floor apartment near the Regency Square corridor, Petty Officer First Class Quinn Harstad, retired, jerked awake at 4:51 in the morning, with both hands pressed flat against the mattress and her left thigh screaming cold. The dream was always the same in its geography, even when it changed its details. The hard landing of the MH-60 in the low hills east of Deir ez-Zor, the rotor screaming wrong, the sudden oblique tilt, and then the impact that had driven a steel rod into her femur like a railroad spike. The smell of jet fuel, the particular silence that preceded the second explosion, and through all of it, the last thing she had registered before the blackout. 82 pounds of Malinois, throwing himself into the dust cloud, lunging toward the source of the first shot, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. Quinn sat up, left leg stiff and radiating cold the way it always did before a Florida storm. She pressed her palm against her thigh and breathed through her teeth, waiting for the ache to settle into its usual background frequency. It had been 22 months since the crash, 22 months since the medevac team had pulled her out of that ravine unconscious with a shattered femur and a grade 4 concussion. The official report from Naval Special Warfare Command, delivered to her recovery bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, had used the language of finality, designated Cobalt K9 Handler Quinn P. Harstad. Status: killed in action. No remains recovered due to hostile fire conditions. She had never believed it, not for a single day. She had spent every dollar of her medical retirement pay and most of her waking hours building a case against that report. Calls to contractors, emails to allied K9 units, freedom of information requests that came back either redacted or delayed. For so long they might as well have been burned. One former teammate, a sniper named Jarvis Polk, had helped her build a spreadsheet of military working logs that went missing in action in the Levant Theater over the past 4 years. It was a longer list than anyone outside the community understood. She reached for her phone. 4:53 a.m. A text from Jarvis sent at midnight. "Quinn, I know you're probably sleeping. Probably not. Look at this link, bottom of the page. Third photo from the end. Don't wait until morning." Jarvis didn't send messages like that without a reason. She tapped the link, a Facebook post from a Jacksonville animal rescue advocacy group, the kind that did last-minute appeals for dogs on county euthanasia lists. The post was dated Monday evening. Urgent Duval County Animal Services, Stray 119. Behavioral hold expires 9 a.m. Tuesday. Unapproachable. Transport offers needed immediately. She scrolled through the photos. Sad-eyed pit bulls, a 3-legged hound, 2 scruffy terriers, and near the bottom, a single image taken through chain link from a distance, the lighting bad, the angle awkward. A Belgian Malinois standing utterly still in the middle of a run, staring back at the camera. Quinn sat up straighter. She pinched the photo and zoomed in. The resolution degraded fast, but she could make out the fawn coat, the dark saddle, the heavy muscle across the shoulders, and at the top of the right ear, a torn notch, healed over, V-shaped, like something had taken the tip cleanly. She had sutured that ear herself. She could place the moment exactly. A courtyard in Al-Mayadin, a piece of rebar swung in the dark, Cobalt taking the blow that had been aimed at her knee. She had done the stitches with a trauma kit and a headlamp while Cobalt sat motionless beside her, watching her work, not making a sound. The ear healed crooked. The notch was permanent. Quinn was already off the bed. 4:57 a.m. The shelter was 19 miles away. Euthanasia at 9. She had just over 4 hours, but the shelter wouldn't open until 7. And the behavioral hold order meant no civilian could claim the animal regardless of documentation. Until the director reviewed it in person, she knew bureaucratic systems. She had spent 2 years learning exactly how they functioned and where they could be moved. She pulled on jeans and a grey long sleeve, jammed her feet into boots without untying them, grabbed her keys and the single most important object in the apartment, a folded canvas lad in olive drab, clipped to a heavy brass ring, the same lad she had clipped to Cobalt's working harness every day for 3 years. She kept it in the inside left pocket of her jacket. She had washed the jacket exactly once since the crash, and only because she had spilled coffee on it and couldn't stand the smell. She hadn't been able to wash the pocket. Gordon Alessi arrived at the shelter at 7:15 to find a woman already waiting at the front doors with her arms crossed and the specific kind of controlled calm that people carry when they are holding something much heavier underneath. She was younger than he'd expected for the set of her jaw. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with short dark hair and posture that didn't come from a gym. There was a pale scar across the left side of her chin, and she stood with her weight shifted slightly to the right, the unconscious habit of someone whose left side had been through something significant. "Quinn Harstad," she said before he could speak. She held up a Department of Defense identification card, her Naval Special Warfare clearance, and a folded copy of a military working dog registration form that she had printed the previous night from a scanned document she'd been carrying in her email drafts for 8 months. "I believe you have my dog." Gordon looked at the documents, then at her. "Come inside." He walked her through the process honestly. The shelter's legal obligations under county code, the behavioral hold, the euthanasia order Dr. Fike had signed, the impossibility of releasing an animal flagged as a public safety risk without a formal review. She listened to all of it without interrupting once. "I understand everything you just said," Quinn told him when he finished. "I also need you to understand that the animal in Run 17 is a multi-purpose canine trained by Naval Special Warfare Command to respond to one handler. I am that handler. I need to go back there." "Mrs. Harstad." Petty Officer Harstad, retired. Not aggression. Precision. "I'm not asking you to open the kennel. I'm asking to stand in front of it. That's all. If I'm wrong, if that's not my dog, I'll leave and you can proceed with your schedule. But if I'm right, you will save every person in this building from a very bad morning." Gordon looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his radio and called Dr. Fike. Dr. Fike was already prepping the euthanasia solution when Gordon escorted Quinn through the double doors into the isolation ward. The smell hit her immediately. Bleach, stress pheromones baked into concrete, the layered barking from the other runs that never fully stopped. She had been in facilities like this stateside when she and Cobalt came home between deployments for requalification. The smell was the same everywhere. It was the smell of systems and holding patterns. Run 17 was at the far end. Stevie Moran, the lead animal control officer, stood outside the yellow line with his arms folded, watching the kennel with the expression of a man who had privately made peace with the morning being ugly. Quinn saw the dog before she reached the yellow line. Cobalt had stopped mid-circuit and was standing at the gate, looking down the hallway toward the sound of new footsteps. Ears pricked forward at maximum alert, body coiled and still. She kept her stride even, not faster, not slower. She had learned years ago that a dog trained in threat assessment reads pace, changes the same way it reads everything else, as data. She stopped at the yellow line. Cobalt's head lowered half an inch. "I wouldn't get any closer," Dr. Fike said behind her, his voice low. "He charged the gate at considerable force last time anyone." Quinn stepped over the yellow line. There was a sharp intake of breath from Stevie Moran, and she heard Gordon move forward reflexively, and Dr. Fike said, "Wait," in the tone of a man who knows it's already too late. Cobalt launched. He hit the chain link at full momentum, and the entire panel flexed outward with a sound like a thunderclap. His teeth were at the mesh, his amber eyes blown wide, the vocalization coming out of him something between a bark and a snarl, layered and compounded and furious. The gate bowed visibly under the impact. Quinn pressed her forehead against the chain link. She put her face 6 inches from his jaws. "Cobalt," she said. Not a command, not a plea, just his name in her voice, at her register, with the specific inflection she had used every single day for 3 years. The way you say a word that has always belonged to you. The effect was not gradual. Cobalt stopped, not slowed, stopped. In the space between 1 second and the next, the full momentum of his defensive drive cut off as cleanly as a circuit thrown. His hackles, ridged from his skull all the way to his tail, flattened against his coat in a wave, like a field of grass when the wind changes direction. His breathing, loud and rapid and furious a moment ago, shifted in 3 breaths to something slow and deliberate. His eyes changed. The dilation pulled back, the amber that had gone nearly black with arousal cleared, and he looked at her, really looked at her, the way a working dog looks at the one person in the world it fully recognizes as its own. "Af," Quinn said quietly, the Dutch command for down. Cobalt sank to the concrete floor. Not a collapse, the controlled, deliberate down of a dog responding to the handler it trusts without reservation. His chin came to rest between his front paws, and he looked up at her through the chain link, and the sound he made was a single soft vocalization, low and unsteady, carrying something that had nowhere else to go. Behind Quinn, no one spoke. She was aware of Gordon and Dr. Fike and Stevie Moran standing at the end of the corridor, and she was aware that none of them were breathing at a normal rate, and she didn't look at any of them. She reached into the left pocket of her jacket and pulled out the olive drab lead and held the brass clip against the chain link. Cobalt pushed his muzzle into the mesh, trying to close the distance, the low vocalization continuing in short, ragged intervals. He was pressing his weight against the gate, not in aggression, but in the single-minded effort of a dog trying to get to the one person he had been waiting for through all the weeks, and all the wrong smells, and all the days that had made no sense. Quinn's hand was shaking. She hadn't noticed until now. The hand holding the lead against the chain link was trembling with a fine, continuous tremor she couldn't stop, and she pressed her palm flat against the metal, and it didn't help. "Open the gate," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "Petty Officer Harstad," Dr. Fike's voice was careful, "legally under county hold." Open the gate. Gordon Alessi stepped forward. He had seen a lot of things in 19 years. He had never seen a dog that had fractured an aluminum catchpole 2 days ago, now lying voluntarily on the floor with its chin down. He looked at Dr. Fike. Dr. Fike looked at him. They had a conversation in the span of 3 seconds that required no words at all. Gordon unlatched the gate. Quinn pushed it open and stepped inside. Cobalt didn't stand. He army-crawled across the concrete floor on his belly, tail tucked low, whining in a continuous high pitch. She had never once heard from him in 3 years of working together, because he had never had reason to make it before. When he reached her boots, he stopped. He pressed his forehead against her left shin and went still. Quinn went down to her knees on the stained concrete. She put both arms around his neck and pulled him in, and his weight settled against her chest, 82 pounds of bone and muscle and scar tissue, pressing against her with the specific desperation of something that has been holding on alone for a very long time. She could feel his ribs under his coat. She could feel new scars under her palms, places where the fur grew in different directions over healed damage, and she ran her hands over each one the way you read a story you weren't there for. She put her face into the fur at the back of his neck. Cobalt pressed harder against her. His entire body was shaking. Not fear, not cold, but the physical release of something held under pressure for too long, finally let go at once. "You held on," she said into his fur, her voice wrecked and quiet. "I've got you. We're done. We're going home." The paperwork took 4 hours. Gordon made the call to Naval Station Mayport at 9:15, 36 minutes past the scheduled euthanasia time, with Quinn sitting on the floor of his office and Cobalt's head in her lap, his eyes half closed, one hand resting steady on his flank. A military K-9 liaison officer, Lieutenant Commander Dana Trestman, arrived from the base at 11:40 with a specialized reader and a classified file in a brown sealed envelope. The chip was there. It had always been there. The civilian shelter scanner simply didn't operate on the DK9 frequency, a protocol that existed for the same reason that classified working dog identities aren't kept in public databases. Lieutenant Commandra Trestman verified Cobalt's identity in under 90 seconds. The story of how Cobalt had gotten from eastern Syria to a freight yard in Jacksonville took longer to reconstruct. Trestman outlined what the intelligence trail supported, speaking in the careful way military officers do when they are sharing what is cleared while navigating around what is not. After the crash and Quinn's medevac extraction, Cobalt had evaded capture for approximately 11 days in the Syrian interior before being detained by a paramilitary group with commercial ties to a private security contracting network. The group had attempted to condition him to a new handler that had apparently not gone well for anyone involved. From there, the trail was fragmentary. A private contractor with existing DoD logistics contracts had at some point acquired Cobalt through channels that the Inspector General's office was currently examining. The intent had been resale to a private security firm on the eastern seaboard, but a federal investigation into the contractor's shipping manifests in late spring had caused the operation to collapse suddenly, and the people running it had abandoned their cargo at a staging facility near the port of Jacksonville. Cobalt had broken out of a transport crate within 24 hours. He had been living in the industrial corridor near the waterfront for an unknown number of weeks before the sheriff's deputies picked him up. "He was doing what he was trained to do," Quinn said. She hadn't looked up from Cobalt during the explanation. "He was surviving until I got to him." Lieutenant Commander Trestman was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I believe he was." Gordon pushed the final county release form across his desk. His handwriting on it was unusually careful. He met Quinn's eyes when she looked up to sign. "I want to say something," he said. "I want to say that I'm sorry we almost—" He stopped. The sentence didn't have a satisfying end, and he seemed to know it. Quinn shook her head. "You were doing your job with the information you had. That's a system problem, not a you problem." She signed her name in 3 quick strokes and slid the form back. Word had moved through the building the way it always moves in small enclosed spaces where something impossible has occurred. Fast, imprecise, and charged with the particular electricity of people who have collectively witnessed something they don't have a framework for. The hallway was lined when Quinn walked Cobalt out of Gordon's office on the olive drab lead, kennel technicians, veterinary staff. The intake clerk who had processed stray 119 on a Thursday morning that already felt like a different era. Stevie Moran stood near the far door, with his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that wasn't quite military but was the closest a civilian could manage. Cobalt walked beside Quinn at perfect heel. He didn't scan the staff. He didn't flinch at the noise from the other runs. His amber eyes were focused somewhere beyond the end of the hallway, fixed on the rectangle of morning light coming through the glass doors ahead. He had stopped shaking. Quinn walked with a slight catch in her left stride, the rod in her femur doing what it always did when Florida humidity dropped before a storm. Cobalt matched her pace exactly, not pulling ahead, not lagging. The synchronization of two bodies that had learned each other's rhythms over hundreds of hours working in close proximity, in conditions that required them to function as a single unit. At the lobby doors she paused and turned back. Gordon was standing at the end of the hallway with his hands in his pockets. "Thank you," Quinn said, "for the extensions, for letting me in." "Thank you for getting here," he said. His voice had a roughness in it he didn't try to disguise. "Take care of him." She looked down at Cobalt. He was already looking up at her. His tail moved in a slow, deliberate sweep. Not the frantic wag of a dog overwhelmed by feeling, but the steady rhythm of a dog that knows exactly where it is and exactly where it belongs. She pushed the door open. The Jacksonville morning came in full and warm, thick with the smell of coming rain, live oaks, asphalt, and the distant brine of the St. Johns River. Cobalt lifted his head and pulled the air in long and deep, his nostrils working, cataloguing the new world around him with the methodical attention of a dog reorienting himself after a long time in a place that had made no sense. Quinn opened the passenger door of her truck. Cobalt vaulted in without a command, turned twice on the bench seat, and settled with his muzzle resting on the sun-warmed leather of her jacket, which she had left folded there that morning when she'd grabbed it off the seat in the dark. She stood outside the truck for a moment with her hand on the doorframe. The morning pressed against her face. The calendar on her phone had a Tuesday marked with a small red dot, a VA follow-up for her leg. She'd missed it. She'd call them later. She got in. Cobalt shifted and pressed his flank against her left thigh, warm and solid and real. The drive home was quiet. The radio stayed off. At a red light on Beach Boulevard, Quinn reached over without looking and rested her hand on the back of his neck, and he pressed his head down into the contact, and neither of them moved until the light changed. 22 months was a long time to hold a perimeter alone. They were both done holding.